This is our bio in one video.
Наркобарон.
Here are some safe behaviors to demonstrate in the lab at all times. Number 1, be cautious. Be careful of lab equipment and stay vigilant of your surroundings. Do not drink or eat anything from the lab. Number 2, follow the procedures. While doing a lab, don't skip steps unless the teachers instructed you to do so. Number 3, clean up after a lab. Be responsible for the equipment that you use and clean up after the mess you made. Be aware that you are sharing a classroom with other students and the classroom is a public space. Number 4, listen to instructions. Understand the criteria that teachers present and understand what you are supposed to do. Do not rush to do anything before the teachers explain. Number 5, don't play with equipment. Don't fool around with lab equipment, especially test tubes, alcohol lamps, etc. Number 6, don't touch equipment without being told to do so. Don't touch any classroom equipment without permission, especially the ones you don't know what it is. Number 7, don't take off any safety equipment. Protect yourself properly from damaging substances such as sulfuric acid. Number 8, don't eat or drink anything used in a lab experiment. Many times after a reaction or contamination, things could become unsafe or unhealthy for consumption, and anybody that eats them could suffer from detrimental health consequences. Number 9, don't fight. Fighting could lead to many dangers, including broken glass, wasted equipment, and chemical spills.
Elements turn into compounds, compounds turn into macromolecules, macromolecules turn into organelles, and organelles turn into cells. There are 7 kinds of proteins: an antibody, enzymes, contractile proteins, hormonal proteins, structural proteins, transport proteins, and storage proteins. Enzymes are catalysts, which lowers the activation energy required for metabolism. Macromolecules are important, and each macromolecule serves a unique purpose. Proteins are chains of amino acids. When proteins are broken down during digestion, amino acids are carried around the body and build and repair muscle and tissue, acting as a catalyst for chemical reactions inside the body, transporting nutrients and carrying out other functions. Similarly, a lipid is a chain of fatty acids, and its main purpose is to provide and store energy. Nucleic acid is a macromolecule that is a chain of monomers called nucleotides. These are what carry and contain the genetic information of a cell, which is copied during DNA replication. Carbohydrates serve a similar function as do lipids and are built out of monosaccharides. Each one of these is essential for the human body, and having a lack of one is detrimental to health.
Systems of cells function together to support the life process through mechanisms promoting homeostasis. The cell cycle is necessary for growth, maintenance, and repair of multicellular organisms. Proteins serve several roles in living things. Cells are the basis of life. Viruses and bacteria have key features that allow them for adaptation and reproduction in various environments, and organisms can survive where internal and external conditions are within a range or limit, and positive and negative feedback mechanisms work to help an organism maintain homeostasis in a changing environment. A DNA has a nitrogen base, a sugar, and a phosphate. Here is a diagram for the endomembrane system. Homeostasis typically involves negative feedback loops that counteract changes of various properties from their target values, known as set points. In contrast to negative feedback loops, positive feedback loops amplify their initiating stimuli. In other words, they move the system away from its starting state.
Proteins regulate and carry out the essential functions, and the instructions for proteins are found in nucleic acids, and our genes are the regions of chromosomes that code for proteins. When proteins are synthesized, errors that occur may cause mutations, which can have varying levels of effects on organisms. Meiosis is the process in which gametes are produced in order to maintain chromosal number in sexual reproducing organisms, and events in the production of gametes lead to variation within the species. Genetic variations result from new genetic combinations via crossing over and segregation. That mutations can occur during DNA replication and or environmental factors. Mutations that occur in gametes can be passed on to offspring. The basic laws of probability that govern gene expression and the Mendelian patterns that predict the probability of genotype and phenotype. As a result of asexual reproduction, the offspring can have identical information to the parent. Sexual reproduction results in offspring with a unique combination of parents' genetic traits. Instructions in genetic code affect the traits of individuals. Structural changes to genes may or may not result in change in proteins. Mutations produce either harmful, beneficial, or neutral changes to traits. The genes in different forms called alleles. The combination of alleles determines the expression of the trait. During reproduction, genes are passed down from parents to offspring. Sexual and asexual reproduction have advantages and disadvantages for both the offspring and the species. Through meiosis, fertilization, and sexual reproduction, the transmission of dominant traits are expressed to the next generation. A dominant trait is more likely to be passed down to the next generation, and it trumps the recessive traits in expression. Through mutations, there are genetic variations.
Evolution is the result of genetic changes that occur in constantly changing environments. Over many generations, changes in the genetic makeup of populations may affect biodiversity through speciation and extinction. Evolutionary changes are driven by natural selection and natural pressures. The forms of empirical evidence about common ancestry and biological evolution: molecular, anatomical, developmental, fossil, laboratory, and field observation. Evolution is inherited changes in a species over time and is a result of natural selection. Natural selection is when individuals have favorable traits that make them better adapted to their environment, allowing them to survive and reproduce more successfully than less well-adapted individuals. Natural selection requires heritable variation in a population that results in differential survival and reproduction. This results in the favorable traits becoming increasingly common in subsequent generations. Natural selection is a mechanism of evolution. Organisms that are more adapted to their environment are more likely to survive and pass on the genes that aided their success. This process causes species to change and diverge over time. Natural selection is one of the pioneers of life itself. Genetic diversity is important because it gives species a better chance of survival. However, genetic diversity can be lost when populations get smaller and isolated, which decreases a species' ability to adapt and survive.
Interactions among organisms influence the dynamics of an ecosystem. Living systems have structures which interact to maintain internal balance. How energy flows through the trophic levels of ecosystem through transformations from light energy to chemical energy to ATP to heat. The role of photosynthesis and respiration play in the cycling of matter and transformations of energy. That food chains and food webs represent energy flow and the matter cycling through. Ecosystems and the types of organisms present are dependent on climate. A constant supply of energy is needed to support the cycling of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen through ecosystems, and that these atoms are conserved by being broken down and recombined. Organisms interact in specific ways, including predation, competition, and symbiosis. In an ecosystem, living things interact with one another, such as a rabbit eating plants or an owl eating a mouse. Living things can interact with non-living things in the environment, such as plants affecting the chemistry of the soil by absorbing nutrients through its roots. Likewise, the non-living things in an environment can dictate what types of living things can survive there. For example, the salinity of water affects the types of plants and animals that live there. All of the living and non-living things work together to form an ecosystem. Here is the water cycle. Here is the carbon cycle. Here is the nitrogen cycle. And at last, here is the phosphorus cycle.
Thank you for watching.